Please bless Easter service, Lord, that you will bring so many people in this house, Lord. Please be with the event that we'll be holding, that will speak to so many people and call them to want to know you more, Lord. Please be with Devin this morning as he preaches his sermon. In Jesus' name we all said.
Here you go, man. Thank you. I feel like we just keep getting better at that, man. It's like they just kind of slip out really easy and put this out here. Easy and kind of, it's not too big of a deal. So, hey, welcome to church again, guys. And I want to try to get out of here early today because I'm yeah, it's good. I'm going camping, and so I'm highly motivated. If you guys are, right? So we're in the book of Proverbs, and I'm just gonna quickly, quickly. You guys are good, man. I'm gonna quickly just kind of backtrack where we've been, and then we'll jump right into things. So if you've not been with us, or maybe you've been out for a little bit, let me just remind you that we are in this series entitled Cover to Cover, in which we are preaching through the entire Bible in a year. And has that been ambitious? Yeah, absolutely, man. It has been an incredibly ambitious thing, but I think you guys are doing good. Anybody want to just who is still tracking with our Bible reading plan? Anybody? We got actually, a few people, a couple people. Yeah. Way to go, you two. And so the rest of you guys, here's the deal. Don't stress. I told you guys, there are going to be plenty of moments where we're going to really shoot forward in our Bible reading plan. And so if you've sort of fallen by the wayside in that, dude, don't stress. Hit me up. I'll get you a new one and just pick up with where we're at now. And we'll make up lost ground. I promise it'll be good. So, but this week we are really kicking off our wisdom series. So we finished the Torah, we finished the law, first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then we moved into Old Testament history, so that was 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, right? And then we kind of have shifted directions, and we did Psalms last week, which is sort of its own standalone thing. But this week we are starting our wisdom literature, and man, it is probably one of my favorite genres of literature in the Bible. I've really been looking forward to this Sunday, next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, really in particularly in this whole series. I really love this. And so, we're picking up there. And then after that, we're going to go visit some major prophets and minor prophets. And then we'll get into New Testament stuff about mid to end of the summer, right? So we're really going to kind of slow it down. We're going to have a lot more Sundays where, we're taking 2 Sundays for a book instead of just 1 Sunday through. All right. So that's where we're at. And I want to start with Once Upon a Time. Once upon a time, there was a man named Bill. And Bill had worked for 40 years in the steel industry, right? It's loud, it's hot, it is busy every single day. It was work, sun up to sundown. And Bill put in his years, right? And Bill decides that it's time for Bill to retire. Bill never had a family. He never had kids or anything. He just really devoted himself to work. And man, he is really looking forward to retirement. And so Bill buys himself a little house at the edge of town and doesn't have a whole lot of neighbors around there. And Bill says the one thing, Bill's a man after my own heart, I'll tell you that, right? So Bill says, day one of retirement, I want to lay down and take a nap. I have never taken a nap in my life. I've worked my whole life. So I want to lay down and take it. So about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, prime napping time, right? Bill lays down to take a nap, and all of a sudden he hears the loudest, most terrible banging sound that you could imagine, right? It sounds like people are banging on a trash can with metal pipes. And lo and behold, that's exactly what was happening. He goes outside and he sees these 3 little redheaded boys, and they're just wearing these trash cans out in the empty lot across from from his house. And Bill's like, no, this will not work, And so he was like, he goes and he talks to the boys and he's like, hey, boys, what are y'all doing? They're like, oh, we come here every day, man, and we like to play, we're getting a band started. And Bill's like, oh, no, this is the worst, right? I moved out of town to get away from this. I want to take a nap, and at 3 o'clock, that's prime napping time. So Bill's like, being a new neighbor, Bill doesn't want to, kind of disturb the waters. And so Bill goes and talks to one of his fellow neighbors. And he's like, hey, what can I do? He's like, oh, man, yeah, sorry, man. We didn't tell you about that before you moved in, but they've been coming here for years, man. Same time, 3 o'clock every day. And he's like, well, I'm going to say something to him. They're like, oh, don't do that, man, because if you do that, they'll be banging on trash cans outside your window in the middle of the night. Don't talk to their parents, because that's just going to really make things worse. And so Bill, kind of relegated to the fact that he will go the rest of his life without ever getting a good nap in. He goes back to his house, but then the next day he comes out and he meets these 3 boys, and he's got a smile on his face. And so Bill says, hey, I just want to tell you guys, I really love what you're doing here. This is amazing. Your passion, your desire to start a band, whatever. It's so great. He said, I love it so much that I want to pay you boys $1 each every single day to come here at 3 o'clock and bang on these trash cans. And they're like, gee willikers, mister. Yeah, we're in. And so they do, and they come back. Man, this goes on for about a week, and Bill's out there, $3 in hand every day, and he hands it off with a big smile on his face. And a week or two goes by of this, and then Bill comes out one day, and he's really sad, and he tells the boys, he says, look, I'm on a fixed income. Gas is over $4 a gallon right now. He's like, I can't keep paying y'all $1 a day. And so he's like, I'll tell you what, though, I'll pay you 50 cents a day. And sure enough, they're like, well, okay, fine, and gives them the 50 cents, and they go about their business. And this keeps up for a while, and then a little bit longer, Bill comes out, and he's got another frown on his face, and he says, guys, he said, I haven't got my Social Security check in. He said, I can't afford to pay y'all 50 cents. I'm just going to pay y'all a quarter a piece. And they're like, hey, forget you, mister. We're never coming back here again, right? And so you're not going to rip us off. And they never came back because they felt like they were getting ripped off. And Bill never saw them again in his life. And Bill had his nap every day at 3 o'clock, right? And what's the moral of this story is that Bill had something that, had he not had, he could have made the situation way worse, and it's that Bill had wisdom, right? If you come at this from the wrong angle, you could easily make things way worse than they are. If you try to go talk to their parents, it could be bad, right? There's a lot of ways that seem like pitfalls, or that seem like you're maybe between a rock and a hard place in a situation. And Bill navigated it wisely and got what he needed, which was a good nap after 40 years on the job site, right? And he did it in a wise way. And why do I tell you this silly, goofy story, man? And the answer is because I think this is us a lot of times. I think we find ourselves in these places, these crossroads in life, where there seems to be no good option, where there maybe even be gaps between what the Bible directly informs for our life and then how we actually live it out. Maybe here's a few examples, right? We're told to be people of integrity, right? So what does that mean in that situation where maybe you know something that nobody else knows, right? But maybe you're on the outside of that. Maybe you're a third party. Maybe you're and you realize that, dude, this information really should come out. But if I am honest, and if I'm open, and if I'm integrous about this, then it's going to do a lot of damage, and it may hurt a lot of people, but it is the truth, right? And where it stands right now, I could stay uninvolved in this thing, and no one would ever have to know, and they could all go about their lives. So what do you do in that moment? Is it acting with integrity to sit back and not do anything? Or you may have been in a position like that before. Maybe you're the one who knows that thing or whatever, and you're burdened with this knowledge, and what do I do with this? How about this one? How about the fact that we're called to be peacemakers, called to be people of mercy, people who forgive, right? And people hurt us all of the time, and so we have this obligation to forgive and maybe try to move on beyond that. But I don't know that means that we have to continually open ourselves up to being hurt again and again and again, right? So there are boundaries maybe that need to be set, but where do we set that? And where do we draw those lines? And how do we do that well? And especially when it's in hard places, like around family, or maybe conflicting things at work or other serious relationships. Anybody ever been in a situation where you had to draw some boundary lines? And where do we do that? And how do we do that? Well, I think it requires wisdom. Maybe it's this one. I love this one, especially in the Pacific Northwest. This usually gets a few people. Are we going to put our kids in public school, or private school, or homeschool them? Anybody ever worked through that one before? Yeah? All right, you have to raise them up. But here's the deal. I know for a fact that a lot of you have, because I've had the conversation. And here's what I know, is that typically for a lot of people, that's a settled idea. Like, dude, we are not putting our kids in blank. Or, man, we're only going to do this or this or this. And here's the deal, man. If you approach this thing as though it is a foregone conclusion, then you have approached it wrong. Because there's incredibly difficult conversations on both sides of this, and there are biblical factors that should push us towards every single one of these options. So what is the correct answer? And is there a correct answer, or are there maybe multiple correct answers in this? I think the answer is that there's wisdom needed in that situation, right? And I think it's a conversation that you as a particular family has to talk about, right? And so here's the deal. I can't even almost begin to scratch the surface. There's three things, and that ate up like 2 minutes of my time, so maybe we're not getting out here as early as I thought, right? But 3 things, I can't even begin to scratch the surface on the amount of these sort of crossroads moments where we come to this place where it's like maybe good decision and other good decision, or maybe they both seem like terrible decisions, or whatever the case is, or maybe the moral latitude on this issue is rather gray, and so if I go this way, it's like, well, it's maybe not the best morally, or this way, and there doesn't seem to be a viable third option. And what I'm saying is that in those moments, in those crossroads, it requires wisdom, and the Bible recognizes this, and it gives us these wisdom books to sort of inform how we approach these things, navigate these situations, right? And here's the deal. Some of you came in here this morning like feeling the pressure of this. Right? So some of you came in here this morning and you've lost sleep over that. You've had a fight with your spouse this week. You have avoided people at work because of issues like this that aren't super clear and require some wisdom, right? It requires like a Bill sort of mentality, right? But how do you come to that sort of brilliant solution to this thing when there seems to be no good option, and biblical wisdom literature is there to sort of bridge that gap and help us do that. And so for the next few weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break from God's people. They're in exile, right? They've been carted off to Babylon, and we're going to leave them there for a few weeks, right? They need to sit in exile. And so we're going to leave them there as we track through this wisdom literature that actually is very, very practical for our daily lives. And we're going to see what it can show us, right? I think it's maybe a good breather and breath of fresh air in the middle of what has been a lot of history, right? A lot of genealogy, a lot of stuff going on. So I think this will be a great break for the next few weeks. But here we go. So here's the deal. We're about to go into the study concepts, but I want to maybe prove to you that we're actually pretty used to this sort of this genre of literature, wisdom literature, right? Let me give you a modern proverb, or I guess maybe a fairly modern proverb. You'll see what I mean, right? A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. What's that mean? Anybody want to take a stab at that? What's that mean? It's the part where you talk in church. It's good. Y'all can do that. What's that? Something in hand. Yes, to expect something that may seem greater or be greater out there in the future, right? And so, something decent that you already possess in hand is much better than something great that you only hope to possess, right? So here's I met this guy when I was in the military, and I don't know, man. This is actually, I was still in Florida. And he was a young married fellow. He had a young daughter, and I remember talking to him one day, and he's one of those guys, just proverbial military haters. You know, like the guys just constantly like dissatisfied with their job and just hate everything about the military and just want to get out and blah blah blah. And so like pretty much every conversation you had with the dude centered on that. And so he's like, I'm getting out, man. I finally decided. I'm pulling the trigger. I'm getting out. And I'm like, oh, good for you, man. You know, like, congrats. And I was like, what are you doing? He goes, well, I don't know. He said, I'm actually thinking about going to art school, man. I'm like, solid choice, buddy. And he said, I'm going to move to Colorado. We're in Florida, mind you. I'm going to move to Colorado, and we're moving in with my sister. And I'm like, you mean with your newborn? And they just got married like 2 weeks ago, man. He's like, yep. He said, we're moving in. I said, so you're going to move in with some newlyweds with your newborn across the country, and you have no job and no prospect, and your wife doesn't want to work and all this stuff. And I was like, because you hate the military, right? And he's like, yep, that's pretty much it, man. I'm like, solid plan, bro. Solid plan. I can't see that not working out for you, right? And I'm not going to tell you how the story ends, but it's not great, right? It ends about how you would think that it ends. And here's the bird in the hand, right? I know you have a job, and it may suck or whatever, but you have a job. And it's better than the two in the bush that you're chasing off in Colorado that seem better, but you don't have a hold of those things yet, right? And so actually, we're really familiar with this kind of literature. I think I even told the guy, man, it's like we're sitting there talking, and I'm like, hey, man, bird in the hand's worth two in the bush, you know? And he's like, yeah, whatever, man. And I'm doing it. And he's like sold on this thing. And it was really a foolish thing, right? And the point is when we come to these crossroads that require wisdom, we have a choice to turn either towards like a wise decision or a foolish one. And that may seem very simplistic. But actually, there are some things that drastically complicate this process. And we're going to talk about that, right? Because objectively, when we look at that guy's story, we can say, yeah, that was foolish, man. That was a terrible decision. But in that moment, and he was actually a rather smart guy, like in that moment, it didn't seem foolish to him. There were some things that had drastically complicated that, and I think we find ourselves in that place all of the time. So I want to figure out how we read wisdom literature well. And then I think it'll help us through some of those things. All right, so let's move into our study concept for today. So study concept, if you're new with us or it's been a little bit, is the part where I'm going to help you read the Bible well for yourself. Sort of the teach a man to fish moment, right? So you don't have to rely on me every single week. But here it is. Here's how we read wisdom literature well. I think if we're going to understand wisdom literature, we first have to understand what wisdom is. So in your notes, if you're taking notes, wisdom is a capacity of the mind that allows us to understand and live our life from God's perspective. Capacity of the mind. The question really being asked here is, who defines ultimate reality? Ultimate reality. So what if I said that I was a master electrician, Ethan? I'm a master electrician. Is that true? Not true at all. Actually, you don't want me touching your house or anything, right? I can maybe reinstall an electrical outlet, but that's about where my electrical, that's where it stops for me, right? Now, all right, so that's ultimate reality. But what if I really want to be that, and so I just start telling a bunch of people that that's actually what I am? Does that make me a master electrician? Well, no, but if I go ahead and get a van and put Devin's, Zap wizardry on the side of it or something like that, and hook it up on Instagram, and you guys and follow me. I got a new electrician service coming to town. Awesome, right? Now I'm a master electrician. Is that how that works? Not how that works, right? I will still burn your house. I'll come up in the coolest van you've ever seen, my Zap wizardry on the side of it, and I'll burn your house down, right? Because that's the ultimate reality, is I don't know what I'm doing with electricity, and I shouldn't be anywhere near it. And I know that's funny, but the reality is that in our culture, truth and ultimate reality are up for grabs. It can be defined along lines that suit you best. Listen to me really closely. Wisdom is saying that it doesn't work that way. The claim of wisdom is that, man, there is a way that the world and the universe, everything in it, works best and by design. And when we get off from that, that's when we really head towards destruction, right? Wisdom is saying this universe, our relationship with one another and with God, our approach to money or sex or marriage or integrity or justice or any one of another million different things that are kind of detailed in the wisdom literature, they're like a clock, like a Swiss clock. Right? This complex, every piece has to move the way that the watchmaker has intended for it to, and you can't just shove random cogs in there and hope that it works. It actually has to be the right way. It's the real reality based off of the clockmaker, right? And so Here's the deal. Biblical wisdom is trying to realign our view of reality to fall in line with God's perspective and how He has designed the world to work best. It should be very reminiscent language from Genesis 1, 2, and 3, right? Garden narrative. We also have to talk about what a proverb is. Actually, we're going to skip that there. Sorry. I kind of moved some things around in my notes here. All right, so we're going to talk about what a proverb is as well. Proverbs are short comparison sayings that we are meant to read and ponder our life in light of. So we're in the book of Proverbs, but it's not the only place that we find Proverbs, right? A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? So you see the comparison in that. Let me give you a good example of this. Proverbs 12, 17 through 19. This is just literally pick this at random, right? He who speaks truth tells what is right, but, this is the other hand, but a false witness deceit, right? And then the very next verse, there is one who speaks rashly like the thrusts of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. See comparison here. Truthful lips will be established forever, but a lying tongue is only for a moment. These short, sort of pithy, tweetable statements, right? And there's a comparison between two things, and we're meant to take our life and find ourselves somewhere in the spectrum of those two sayings, right? And again, I told you last week that we don't read poetry the way that we read narrative, right? You read narrative with a pen and a paper and a dictionary or biblical commentary in hand, but you read poetry with a cup of coffee and a friend as you sit down and really dive into the emotions and the very real life experiences that the literature is trying to draw you into, right? And so did you notice the pattern of parallelism? I have it up there. It's like A, B, B, A, A, B. I think maybe my next slide. Yeah, that could have been way bigger, right? But he who speaks truth tells what's right. That's A. It's a positive thing. And then there's negative, and then the next, negative to positive, positive to negative. So there's all of these sort of devices that you're meant to see and sort of work through as you read the Proverbs. And not just what they're saying, but the arrangement of these things in comparison are telling us something as well. And you have to keep that in mind as you're reading through the Proverbs, right? Finally, as we read biblical wisdom, or especially the Proverbs, we have to remember this, that Proverbs are not promises. This is really tough, right? It's kind of a tough concept for us because we read the Bible and we think that it is true, right? And so this is like going to be, this thing is going to come to pass. And it isn't that this isn't true. I guess maybe it's the best way to explain. Proverbs are more like guidelines of how life works best than hard and fast rules. What makes this more difficult is that the book of Proverbs isn't really concerned with any of the exceptions to the rules, right? That's mainly what Job and Ecclesiastes do. They kind of talk about the exceptions to the rules. So let me talk about exceptions to the rules for just a second. I'll show you what I mean. This is one that we just read. Truthful lips will be established forever, but a lying tongue is only for a moment. Is that always true? Well, not always, actually. You guys know who Ravi Zacharias is? You guys know who Ravi Zacharias is? Man, he had a very, very influential platform, worldwide ministry for that matter, right? Until the day he died. He actually lived a long time with a particularly aggressive type of cancer. He was a pastor, an apologist. He always seemed very humble, incredibly intelligent, and a very very strong defender of the faith. The problem was that after he died, an investigation found out that he was actually a little bit abusive. He was found to be involved in the sex worker industry. He even had ties to some outright human trafficking things, had massage parlors and stuff over the world. And maybe that's news to you. And if you loved him and I'm breaking news to you about him in this moment, I'm very sorry about that, right? But here's the deal: some crazy stuff has come out from him, and the Ravi Zacharias Foundation has completely come forward and yes, this is true, this is what happened, blah blah blah, and so. But here's the deal. Was his lying tongue only for a moment? No. And honestly, you would think that if anything would motivate God to treat this proverb like a hard and fast rule, it would be the type of blatant hypocrisy that men like Ravi Zacharias have committed. And yet, Ravi enjoyed a long life in ministry. That's tough, man. Here's the deal. The book of Proverbs does not account for how sin and free will can affect these sort of if-then statements. People still raise their children in the way they should go, and guess what? When they get old, they do depart from it sometimes. Why? Because like it or not, your children are just as sinful as you are and will one day get a chance to make their own decisions regardless of how well you raised them. This doesn't mean that you should beat yourself up if your child grows up to do things that you might consider to be disgraceful. It also doesn't mean that God has somehow failed to uphold a promise. But if you raise your child right, when they get older, they won't depart from that teaching, right? Ecclesiastes, which we will take a look at next week, is much more concerned about the exceptions to these rules. If Proverbs was written by this young, sort of idealistic Solomon who thought that you could conquer the world through wisdom, then Ecclesiastes was written by this old grizzled Solomon who'd seen some stuff over the years, and maybe he was a little bit cynical in his old age, and he had kind of was like, well, you know what? It doesn't always work out as neat and tidy as you think it does, and that's sort of the whole gist that Ecclesiastes is sort of trying to get across to us, right? All right. You guys doing good? You doing all right? It was a lot. You guys ready to dive into our book for today? I am. All right, story overview. Here we go. Proverbs chapter 1. Chapters 1 through 9 are like a letter. They're a letter written from a loving father teaching his son about the voices that influence us towards either wisdom or folly. Remember I told you guys that every decision, every crossroad that we come to, and we are not making these decisions in a vacuum. There are people, our own experiences, our culture, all sorts of things that are playing into this. And the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs are calling these voices out and really highlighting how they operate in our lives so that we can sort of recognize those voices and operate in spite of them, right? And you're going to meet 4 different voices in this section. In this section, you're going to meet the good father, Solomon, right? He's acting as sort of this fatherly figure. You're going to meet Lady Wisdom. You're also going to meet the wicked man, and then you're going to meet Lady Folly, also called the adulteress sometimes in this section. If you notice, there are 2 good voices and there are 2 evil voices. And here's the deal with these. This gets tricky because in our minds we want to begin to categorize people like, oh, you're the wicked man and you're Lady Wisdom or whatever the case. And it doesn't really work that way. I'm sorry, I'm just picking on you today, Ethan. Sorry, man. It's not like you have this one friend that is, the wicked man, and you can just categorize him as such. Now, the reality is that you may have somebody that plays the part of the wicked man one day, but then the next day they, over a completely different issue, they're really encouraging you to take a wise step, right? Actually, these voices, they're a little bit harder to discern, but we have to dive into how this works. Right? I'll show you how these passages work. We're going to see the first of these 4 voices here. Proverbs 1, 8 through 9. This is the good father. Here's what he says. He says, "Hear, my son, your father's instructions, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." Why, man? Well, they are a graceful wreath to your head and ornaments about your neck. This is a good thing. Receive this as a thing of beauty, and receive this out of a position of love, right? I think we have to recognize that. The father is coming. Like, why does the father impart wisdom? Is it because the father has something to gain? I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're really unwise, you could end up living at your father's house maybe forever. But other than that, it's like, no, man, we want you to flourish and do well in this world. And so, our motivation is strictly a motivation of love, right? This voice is outside of yourself and is pushing you to live in God's definition of reality and of good and evil. This might be the Bible, might be your pastor, maybe it's the culture of a healthy church or an expedition group. Maybe it's a good book, Bible study. Maybe even a concerned friend who's operating in wisdom. This is that outside external voice that is sort of beckoning you to choose wisdom and choose life, right? This voice is trying to incline you to seek out wisdom, is meant to be contrasted with the voice that we meet the very next verse, right? This is verse 10 of chapter 1. It's my son. He said, if sinners entice you, do not consent. This is another word for the wicked man, right? If sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Who talks like that, for starters? But he says, let us swallow them alive like Sheol. Even whole as those who go down to the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. Throw your lot in with us. We shall all have one purse. Yeah, that seems like a good idea, right? The voice of the wicked man is trying to get you to follow any alternate reality beyond God's view of reality. Maybe that's one that your culture has defined. Maybe that's one that a particular tribe or group of people, or maybe that's one that maybe that just you define for yourself. This is sort of the thrust of the postmodern mindset, is that truth and reality can be whatever you want it to be. And we have to sort of respect that view of reality as though it's true. And the problem is that very often your view of reality kind of rubs against the grain of my view of reality. And what do we do in those moments? And our culture says go to war in those moments, right? This voice is either self-serving or is trying to get you to be self-serving. This is any voice calling you to think and live contrary to God's view of reality. Again, this is sort of those external voices. And okay, I included this. Sorry, I like arranged a lot of things, like moved some things around in my notes yesterday, so sorry about that. I wanted to kind of draw out the hyperbole that the author uses in this moment. You notice it, right? Like who talks like, come let us lie and wait for blood, and it's easy to see stuff like that, I think, and think nobody talks like that, It's like I obviously would recognize that for the foolishness that it is, and I would run away. But the reality is actually the author is using hyperbole, sort of over-exaggerated statements to drive home the point, right? The thrust of it is still the same, but oftentimes it comes a lot more subtly. And let us lie and wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause, right? We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. Throw your lot in with us. We shall have one purse, the wicked man says. Do you guys know, this is an example of maybe how this would work out. I literally picked one at random, but do you know why there's still such a homeless crisis in our country? It's because it is big money. Like there is huge money involved in the homeless crisis, and that's terrible. It's a lot like cancer research, stuff like that. It's like, man, I'm not like a conspiracy-minded dude, but I have some things in me that think that like there are things out there that could maybe that we've come a long ways in medical research and stuff like that. And it's like, dude, that's a multi-trillion-dollar a year industry. Like, why would companies be motivated to like essentially sever a large stream of their income, right? And again, I'm not like really, you guys know me, I'm not super conspiracy minded, right? But I do know enough to know that people will latch onto things to make money, even at the expense of others. And so here's the deal. You are maybe you're looking to get a job in a working with some government agency that is serving the homeless or seemingly serving the homeless. And maybe it's that job and another job, and you're up, trying to decide which one of these. And then you come to a verse like this, and what do you have to do? Well, man, you have to be honest with yourself about our culture and about the way that the world sort of works, and realize that, man, there are a lot of government agencies that are existing, man, as these bloated entities that are taking money that could be directed to other things. And someone who is wise will take that and will conflate that information with the Proverbs and other things, man, that drive us to realize that actually there are people that are profiting off of the backs of other people. Taking money that was designated for homeless people or, to serve like the homeless crisis. And we're coming in, we're setting up committees and we're making jobs and we're creating these task force and these things. And it's like, man, one thing I learned in the military is that the government is not good at like we're good at like one thing, man. And that's moving a lot of stuff and killing people. And you try to get us beyond that into like innovation and other stuff, man. And we like we don't do very well, do we, man? I got some guys. It's like, and you see the private sector comes in and does it. So the problem I have, am I making sense? Am I rambling here, I guess? Like the problem is it doesn't sound like come let us lie and wait for blood. It actually sounds like we're going to set up this other committee that's like, going to fix this problem. And the reality is people are profiting off of the backs of, profiting off of taxpayers to do. It's just one example that I kind of picked out of thin air. It doesn't oftentimes sound the way that it will in the book of Proverbs. These are hyperbole, these are over-exaggerated statements, but the truth of it, the heart and soul of the matter is the same, man, is that there are things just within the homeless crisis that exist as this inflated budgetary item to really, at the end of the day, line the pockets of people that say that they want to help in this. That's actually coming from a guy who was a big part of it. He was a psychologist for the state and sort of watched how a lot of this legislation went through. So that wasn't just me like randomly deciding that was a good example to pull out. So anyways, all right. Lady Wisdom is our next voice that we're going to hear from. Here's where we see her in verse 20 through 24. It says, wisdom shouts in the streets. She lifts her voice in the square. At the end of the noisy street, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her sayings. How long, O naive ones, will you love being simple-minded? And scoffers delight themselves in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge. Turn to my reproof, she beckons out. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. Because I called and you refused. I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention. Lady Wisdom is more of an internal and experiential voice. Wherever there is wisdom happening, she is beckoning us to follow after and find more of the same. You see sexual integrity at work? It's Lady Wisdom. Someone caring for the poor, visiting the sick? Lady Wisdom, right? There's someone raising their children, according to God's word. There's wisdom. There's someone that is, acting lovingly and in life-giving ways in the relationships. There's Lady Wisdom. You see somebody making sound financial decisions. Lady Wisdom is there, right? She plays off of the experiences that we have seen in the past that drive us to seek more of her wisdom. And she stands out. She stands out amongst the crowd. You see her, she's yelling in the streets. Later on, she's going to be on the housetops. She's going to be at the gates of the city. She doesn't hide herself. Her examples are all around us, but she's meant to be sort of contrasted with the very last person that we're going to meet, who comes out at night and lurks in the back alleys. Finally, we see Lady Folly. This is Solomon talking to us. He says, my son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion and your lips may reserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress, Lady Folly, right, drip with honey, and they're smoother than oil in her speech. But in the end, she is a bitter wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it. Do you notice how subtly she operates? Right, smooth as oil, sweeter than honey, and yet, man, she is deadly. And again, these are the experiences, these are sort of the cultural undercurrents and the things that will drive us to either act wisely or unwisely. And man, it's not always blatant and in your face. A lot of times the author is using hyperbole to sort of drive home this point. It happens very, very subtly. And these are the four voices. The Father, Lady Wisdom, the wicked man, and Lady Folly that are constantly sort of vying for our attention. So we're going to see how those voices work as we launch into our next section. It's, chapters 10 through 29. So chapters 10 through 29 cover general wisdom sayings and proverbs for hundreds of different topics. When you think of Proverbs, this is probably the section that you think of. Those little one-liners, the comparison sayings, some of the things that we've are already talked about so far. This is the section that everybody has a little calendar on their desk for. Today's proverb is blank, whatever. And it covers things like money, sex, neighbors, friends, marriage, raising your children, justice, government, work, leadership, all sorts of stuff, right? And in this section, we are getting a view into God's reality in each one of these areas. We're meant to take that view and apply it to those crossroads moments that we must make either a wise or unwise decision. We're meant to do this as we are aware of those different voices that are at play, trying to get us to make either that wise and God-honoring decision that leads to life and joy, or that unwise and self-gratifying decision that leads to ruin. So let's look at an example. from the section, and we will we'll kind of see how these four voices are at work trying to pull us in different directions. Right? Let's use Proverbs chapter 11, verse 24 through 26. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be there for a few minutes. Proverbs chapter 11, 24 through 26. Here it is. It says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. People curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell." It's verse 28. "He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf." So I want to talk about an area that typically gets like everybody's attention. Probably one that everybody in this room has made both wise and maybe some unwise decisions in. And typically when we make unwise decisions in this area, the blowback is pretty instant and it can be pretty severe depending on what your decision is. And that's money. Specifically the area of being generous. And here's the deal. As I say being generous with money, I don't know, there's 60 people in the audience right now. There's probably 60 different definitions of what that actually looks like. What does generosity mean? What am I? So let me just get us all on the same page. And so I picked the one that was like maybe the most controversial out of all of those, just because that's typically the places that people pay attention in. And that's being generous through your local church giving, right? So let's just break that conversation open with these proverbs in our mind, right? Can we just stop for a second and just thumbs up from everybody? Is this a controversial topic? You ever seen anybody with strong opinions on either side of this issue before? Has this ever led to people leaving churches before? Has it ever been handled so badly, in fact, that people have left faith altogether for? Is it such a controversial topic? Are there so many, let me say it this way, are there so many voices surrounding this issue that it actually is a major barrier for people outside of the faith maybe choosing to follow Jesus for the very first time? Is it that too? So I chose this issue because there are a lot of voices around. All four of these voices are around this issue, and they are vying for our attention, trying to get us to choose either a wise decision or an unwise decision. So just off the surface, is it wise to be generous according to those four verses that we read? Yes. Yes, let me solve that for you right out the gate. Is it wise? Absolutely, right? People who, they curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who's willing to sell. And it's like, I picked the last verse because like if we didn't get it from all of the others, then we'll get it from this one, right? He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf. One person gives freely and they gain more, right? Like you give away, you're generous and you get even more, and another withholds unduly but comes to poverty. I think without a doubt, the thrust of these Proverbs are that it is good to be generous, it is good to give with our finances. But there are voices. So let's talk about a few of those voices for just a second. Maybe just start with my own personal story. We've done better at this at some points in our marriage than we have at others. But from a really early point in our marriage, this was a pretty big ethic for us. I remember we sat in a talk. I can't remember even where it was at. Danielle, is she even in here? I don't know. I think she's outside. We sat in a talk given by Rick Warren where he talks about reverse tithing. You guys know this about Rick, that they do? And you may be thinking, like, Rick has the number 2 best-selling book, like, of all time worldwide. And so you may be thinking that that's, like, not a big deal for them. But actually, they give like, most of that money away. Like, dude could be a multi-millionaire, but he isn't. He actually gives all of that away. They actually live on a pretty meager salary. He drives the same little beat-down Toyota truck that he did when they first got married. They have the same starter house that him and his wife had. Like, they actually live on a pretty meager salary, and they reverse tithe. That is to say they give away 90% of their income and they keep 10% of it. And again, you may be thinking like, dude's a millionaire, but he actually isn't. He doesn't keep all that. Like, or at least, that's what they say. So very early on, we heard this, and we heard this talk by Rick Warren that said, man, like, God has invited us to trust him, like test him in one area, and it's in our finances. Do this, test me in this, and see if I won't be faithful in this to you. And so we just kind of decided early on that we were going to like go for it. And I won't like tell you what we're at right now, but we have systematically stepped it up over a number of years. And man, what I can tell you is that there have been moments where that was scary. There have been moments where it becomes evident that those verses, like, dude, the one person who gives freely and yet gains even more, I can tell you that that's not an absolute promise for all times, right? Like in the moment. There have been moments where that has actually not been the case for us. We've given and it's like, holy smokes, what have we done, right? But in the long arc of God's faithfulness, I can tell you that actually all of those principles are absolutely assured. That I have seen that bear out more times on the other side, that this is God's view of reality, that we would be generous, that we be people who are open-handed and giving with things, and those are the people that God is going to bless, or those are the people that God like rewards his stewards. And I don't want you to think it of like health, wealth, and prosperity type stuff. I want you to think of it like good stewards being rewarded. And the Bible has a lot to say about good stewards. If you're a bad steward, why would I give you more? But if you're going to steward what I have for you the way that I've intended with the view of reality that I have, then I want to bless you because those are the stewards that I want released to go do my work. So there's one voice. Anybody ever seen it? I'll make this statement. I realize now that we can't afford to not be generous. Anybody come to that view of reality around their finances? Al, you guys seen that? Absolutely, man. How long you guys been giving, if you don't mind me asking, Al? Years? Decades? Yeah. How many years, though? How long back? Long arc of God's faithfulness bears out, doesn't it, Al? But here's the deal. We also have other voices around this issue, right? Maybe you're new. Maybe you're considering like giving for the first time. So like maybe you have some debt. Maybe you think the money math like doesn't work out. Like this doesn't add up. And here's the deal, man. That is a view of reality. And God would say in this passage and in others that the math doesn't work the same way in my kingdom that you think that it works out here. And you get a chance. You get a chance to choose to like be faithful to this thing that God has called us to and live under his view of reality, or you get a chance to like live in this other reality that says, well, actually the math bears out this way, and if we do this, like it isn't going to make sense at the end of the day. That is a choice. Maybe you're inclined to think that I'm the wicked man, right? Like maybe I'm saying all this so you'll put money in the plate here, or something like that. And honestly, man, has that been a thing that has driven people away from church in the past? Like, absolutely. Let me ease all your fears, right? I care that you get this concept. I could care less if you get it here. I'll give you a list of a dozen other local churches in this area that, like, if you have hang-ups with, like, giving here, I'd rather you just give somewhere. I do believe it is biblical and right to give within the context of a local church. And so I'll give you a list of those churches if you would like that, right? So, I can't even remember the last time that we said something about our money box there in the back or whatever. Like, honestly, I typically forget it's even there. So if we wait too long to cash your check, I'm sorry about that. But anyways, here's the deal. I care that you get this concept. Like, so if you need to give somewhere else to like ease your mind or something like that, isn't it, man? God's still paving streets with gold, right? You realize that isn't a thing of beauty. Nobody walks around and is like, oh, the sidewalks are so beautiful, right? Like, this is how gorgeous. Like, nobody does that. That is a value statement that God has taken the thing that some men toiled their entire lives away and put it under our feet in his kingdom, right? Dude, God's view of money and stuff is completely upside down from what we have a lot of times. Maybe it's a subtle voice that says, well, if we give, we won't be able to blank. Maybe it's the cultural money math that puts generosity way down on the list, right? When the Bible actually puts that before anything else. Even right now, there are probably a whole storm of different emotions brewing out here in the audience. And I realize that, and actually knowingly waded into a thing that is very touchy and is like a minefield for a lot of people for this very reason. Because if that's you, and if you're sitting there right now and you have some very strong emotions, either for or against or whatever, and it's like, man, I've been burned by this, and I can't believe, he never talks about money, and I really don't, right? If you've been around here for a while, I don't do this very often, ever. I think the last time was a year ago that we talked about money, but here's the deal, I want to do that right now, because if you're sitting here and you have some strong things filtering through your mind, just know those are the voices. Those are the voices that chapters 1 through 9 are trying to tell you to be aware of. And maybe it's a good voice that says, you know what, maybe we do need to take that step. Maybe take that step. Maybe we just need to trust in God's view of reality and take that step and just see if God is faithful and true in this. And maybe it's dude, I can't believe, dude, ears are shut. I'm not listening to this nonsense or whatever. This is here's the deal, those are voices too. And at the end of the day, you come to a crossroads where you get to make a decision what you do. You can give, you can be generous. And again, there's 1,000 other ways this works out. I'm just using the one that typically draws the most fire, right? And that's given to a local church. But you get to make a decision about what you do with that. The view of reality that God puts before us is that there is definitely a wise decision and there's an unwise decision, and there are a whole ton of voices that are trying to pull you in different directions around these issues. And actually, God has made it incredibly clear-cut. He's made it very clear-cut around this issue. You have those voices of justification, your own past experiences, or whatever the case is. And I'm telling you, you've had two people sit here and tell you, man, that I've been given well over a decade now. Al's got a couple decades on me here. Dude, in the long arc of God's faithfulness says that, dude, this thing is most definitely assured. Right? There's been moments, there's been maybe times and seasons where it hasn't been a promise, and so I have to say Proverbs aren't promises, but I can say that Proverbs are definitely assured over the long arc of God's faithfulness. How about this one? Let's just cover a few more, right? The wise fear the Lord and shun evil, but a fool is hot-headed and yet feels secure. A quick-tempered person does foolish things, and the one who devises evil schemes is hated. Proverbs 20, verse 4. Sluggards do not plow in season, so at harvest time they look but find nothing. I love those, man. Does this mean that we're supposed to work with no downtime? No, man. The Bible's actually very clear about the rhythms of rest that we're supposed to have, right? It's just that we must balance our healthy amounts of rest with equally healthy amounts of work. In one verse later, I love this one. If you've ever been involved in counseling or coaching or something like this, this is what's at the heart of a lot of biblical Christian counseling and coaching. This is Proverbs 20, verse 5. It says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. So those are the Proverbs. You guys doing good? Those are kind of the ones that we typically know. And what we're meant to do is take the situations and the crossroads in our lives, and then recognize those voices that are trying to pull us to one side of that or the other, and then live wisely, right? Make the wise decisions. So Proverbs chapter 30 and 31 provide important editorial notes by two different authors. So if you're taking notes, Solomon was like the godfather of wisdom literature, right? He was the Don. And so a lot of guys would come after him and they would copy his work. It would be carried over. And two guys that we're going to see here are Agur and Lemuel. And they take sort of the collected works of Solomon And they're going to tag a few things on. And so the writer of Proverbs, or the compiler of Proverbs, has taken these two things and has put them at the very end, and he's done it on purpose. And I'll actually show you why he's done it. So Proverbs chapter 30, verses 2 through 4. I love this, man. Surely I am more stupid than any man. I do not have the understanding of a man. Neither have I learned wisdom, nor do I have the knowledge of the Holy One. Who has ascended into heaven and descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? This is very reminiscent of how the book of Job sort of ends, right? Who has wrapped the waters in his garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name or his son's name? Surely you know. And again, this is very reminiscent of that literature in the end of the book of Job. So Job has sort of been criticized by all these different guys. God has been criticized by these different people. Job is asking some questions like, why, God? Why is this happening to me? And then God just fires back with a bunch of questions, a lot like this. Where were you at when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you at when I did this or that? Or can you make this happen? Like, you can't even do this. Like, who are you in light of who I am? It's what sort of the end of the book of Job is happening. So Agur is asking, what is our wisdom when compared to God, the creator of all realities' wisdom? Who are we? And then this leads to a really good question, which he actually answers very next. It's, where do we get this kind of wisdom? The wisdom that Solomon is encouraging us to seek. And look at what Agur says. He says, every word of God is tested. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, or he will reprove you. You will be a liar. God's word is where we see that ultimate reality. It's where we see what true wisdom looks like. In verse 6 is telling us not to adapt God's view of reality into one that fits us better, or else it will be found out for the lie that it actually is. And again, here, this may seem like a very simple concept. Let's go to the Bible, right? Seems very simple, but we have to remember that Proverbs dedicates 9 whole chapters at the beginning of the book to the voices that often influence our choice to either live wisely or foolishly. 9 chapters, a third of this book, is dedicated to those voices that say, you have too much debt, you can't give. Or, hey, there are too many evil people and pastors and churches out there, and they're just going to take this and like to give would be blah, 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 or like, what are they even giving them money to? Or I just don't feel led to give, or actually I'm just going to give in this other way that God hasn't really called me to give in, or whatever the case is. And again, I know I'm touching on some really like loaded topics for a lot of people, but that's the point. Because you have voices around, like, so 9 chapters, and here's the deal. It's, where do you go when you come to those crossroads moments? Where do you go? Do you rely on your past experiences? Proverbs says that's a voice. Do you rely on our culture? It's definitely a voice. Do you rely on what we've sort of deemed as good and evil in our, in our sort of own minds? Is it the thing that's just going to benefit you best? Is that what you rely on? Because what happens when actually God's view of reality regularly is going to cost us up front? Yeah, that's right, man. So that's what I'm talking about, right? Do you open up the Bible in those moments and begin to seek out and put together a picture of God's wisdom? God's view of reality around all of these different issues? Yeah, and here's the deal, man. Social media, the last 2 years, pretty much any conversation I've had that lasts more than 10 minutes says that no, that's not the way that we've taken this. Actually, we've taken the thing that matches our political persuasion. We've taken the thing that matches, our sort of skewed view of what Western Christianity is, and we have conflated some things into that don't belong there, and we've done exactly what Agur has told us not to do, and we've created our own view of reality based off of what God said. And God said that's still a lie. Then we get Lemuel, chapter 31. Chapter 31, Lemuel contributes wisdom. It's actually from his mother. He tells us that. And gives us the Proverbs 31 woman. I had to address this, okay? This is a practical example of all the wisdom's teachings synthesized into a single life lived well. So here's the deal. Anybody have you heard of the Proverbs 31 woman? Everybody heard Proverbs 31 woman? Does K-Love still do their Proverbs 31 ministry thing? Is K-Love even around still? I don't even know. It's what we used to listen to like growing up. And so, so here's the deal. I used to have these things. It was like the Proverbs 31 woman. And it was like, it was by women, for women. And here's the deal. I think I need to correct some things around the Proverbs 31 woman, if you guys are good with me doing that real quick. All right. First, this isn't just for women, okay? And maybe sort of intuitively or instinctively known that because it's the Bible and it's good for all people, right? But let me it's really not just for women. The book of Proverbs has used women to personify wisdom incarnate up to this point. We've met two women. There's Lady Wisdom and there's Lady Folly. Not these two women, right? So when the writer wants to personify wisdom in the flesh, he's used women up to. So Lemuel, what he's done, and I told you, he's editorial. He's come in after Solomon. He's taken Solomon's writings and he said, hey, if I'm going to personify wisdom, how am I going to do that? Well, he would do that as a woman. Men, listen to me really closely. This passage, you're a Proverbs 31 woman too, okay? Right? This has so much to do with you. To do not write this off as this is somehow the ideal wife or something like that, right? Please don't hear it that way. Like all Scripture, you must read this in context. This is the second thing I want you to know, right? Here's what I mean. Look at what Proverbs 31 verse 13 says. She looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in delight. Now, here's the deal. Anybody work with wool and flax? Anybody do that? Come on. I know there's going to be one of y'all out there that does that. All right. But perhaps you've read that in the past and been made to feel like a bit of a failure because you don't work with your hands. Maybe you aren't crafty. Or maybe for you, that verse seems like a little Susie homemaker-ish, right? And nothing could be further from your style. And yet, that's sort of the image of this ideal woman or wife that gets passed on. Listen to me. The woman in this passage has been used as a template and turned into to bondage in the past. We have to break that off, man, because this is actually supposed to be a very good thing. And when we see this woman in context, it is an amazing thing. This passage is really, in that moment, it's synthesizing all of the other passages about hard work and honest labor into a single sentence showing what it looks like lived out well, right? You have to understand a few things about their culture, man. That's like you're working with wool and flax. That was sort of a involved process. There were a lot of things that went into that. It was time consuming, right? It was hard work. And so really what's happening here is the Proverbs 31 woman is like the illustrated cover of a book. It's trying to convey as much about the book visually as possible. That's what's happening in this moment. Her working with wool and flax, that ain't to say that, ladies, you need to get a loom at the house, right? It's not it. And for that matter, it's not even for ladies, right? It's for all. So actually, it is wisdom incarnate in this one woman who is really embodying all of the passages about wisdom and hard work and labor and all that, and it synthesized it up into a sentence that made a lot of sense to the people who originally read that, right? And she touches almost all the major themes of wisdom covered in the book and shows what they look like lived out. Covers work, honesty, care for her family, raising children, marriage, leadership, money, like all this and more, right? And then finally, you have to remember that Proverbs is not concerned with exceptions to the rules. Remember that? I said that early on. It's not concerned with exceptions to the rules. Here's what I mean. Let's read this. She works or looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in delight. She is like a merchant ship bringing food. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard, right? Everything is so neat and tidy in Proverbs. The reality, however, is that sometimes you work hard and you still get outbid on the field by some lazy slacker down the road, don't you? Perhaps you buy the field just to find out that it's covered in rocks, just under the surface, right? And it's good for nothing. Maybe you plant a vineyard and 2 weeks later, right, or 2 weeks before the harvest comes, a heat wave comes and shrivels everything on the vine. And here's the deal. Ecclesiastes and Job are going to deal with this really well. So I can't wait to go there in the next couple weeks, right? But please understand, this is the ideal picture, but it's just that. It's the ideal. I want you to think about what I said earlier, right? It's the long arc of God's faithfulness. While these proverbs aren't promises, they are assured when we consider them against the long arc of God's faithfulness in reality. I can't afford to not be generous. I can't afford to not be hardworking. I can't afford to not be integrous because God has called those things a good and right view of reality. I can't afford to handle family or marriage or sexual integrity in ways that God has set off limits, man. Because all those things aren't necessarily promises. They are assured over the long arc of His faithfulness. So, Proverbs 31 individual must consider the long arc of God's faithfulness and apply the whole counsel of wisdom, not just in the moments, but over seasons and years. All right, let's finish out with pictures of Christ in the gospel. I just realized we're not getting out here early. Sorry about that, guys. I failed. Dang it. All right. Proverbs 1, verse 7. I want us to look at the pictures of Christ in the gospel. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. I think we see the gospel here. Let me read this. Proverbs 3, 5 through 8. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. Let's talk about that word fear for just a second. It's not just fear like scared fear. Right? I say not just because there is a component of that. God should scare us a little bit, right? Like what C.S. Lewis said, in the whole Narnia movies. It's like, Aslan, is he safe? And he's like, no, but he is good, or whatever. I forget how the quote goes. Should have wrote it down here. I had this piece of equipment in the military when I was in, and this thing used to terrify me. And it terrified me because, again, electricity. It passed upwards of 4,000 amps through a part that I was oftentimes pouring liquid on top of, and sometimes even had to have my hand on. 1/3 of 1 amp will kill a human man. So, yeah, that's got enough to do you in several, tens of thousands of times. It was terrifying, honestly, because it takes one thing to go wrong in that sequence of events. And dude, you're like a little toasty critter on the ground, right? And like you had to be like pretty much in this liquid bath as you're doing this thing, and you're working with this part, 4,000 amps. And so anybody who works with electricity, it's a lot of juice, right? It's a lot of juice, right? Here's the deal, man. That thing kind of terrified me a little bit, as it rightly should have. But here's the I didn't stop me from working with it, because you had to work with it. It's just that fear made me very conscious that I had to do everything sort of right. I had to follow the rules. If you got out of line, you sort of didn't do things right. If I operated in ways that were contrary to how that machine was designed, it could end catastrophically. So yeah, there was a healthy amount of this thing is a little bit scary. And it's enough to sort of keep the forefront of your mind engaged in the fact that no, you need to stay sharp and you need to stay focused on this thing and actually be very careful to do things right, or else it could work out bad. The fear of the Lord is a lot like that. God's view of reality is right and good. That's the claim of the Bible. And you get to make a decision about whether you believe that or not, or whether you want to follow after that or not. But here's the go. Do I trust God's goodness as I choose to follow his view of reality more than anything else? That's the fear of the Lord. That's the beginning of wisdom. It's constant in front of your mind, a thought that drives you to seek, know, and follow reality as he has defined it. It's back in the garden, Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Now, I've declared this thing good and evil. Will you allow me to define that for you, or will you reach out your hand and choose to define it for yourself? We beat up Adam and Eve a lot of times, but we do the same thing every single day, multiple times. The pursuit of wisdom is deeply connected to the gospel because both have us turning to God to define good and evil for us as we trust in him to guide our steps. I'm going to close out with this. There's this picture repeated in the book of Proverbs. It's the eye, the hand, and the feet. You'll catch it as you read through. And the idea is that the way that you see the world affects the way that you interact with the world and the steps that you take in the world. This is what the gospel is trying to do. The gospel is trying to realign our view and trust in God's reality above our own. Because as we define good and evil for ourselves, it leads to where we're at right now. 7 billion people defining good and evil for themselves. Unwise choices compounding on more unwise choices, and we get the world that we live in. This is the picture of the gospel. Man, this is deeply, deeply connected to the gospel. And I don't know, some of you guys walked in here. You had things that are pressing in on you. Choices that you face, difficult conversations, decisions at work, whatever the case is, financial things. By the way, I didn't want to come off strong on the financial stuff today, right? I think you guys maybe know my heart in that. But I did want to pick something that was definitely a loaded conversation, and I couldn't think of anything more loaded than financial giving, right? But whatever it is, man, begin in this place that says that, God, I want you to define reality for me, good and evil, and then go to the Bible to let that do that. Guess good? Book of Proverbs. Dadgummit, we didn't get out early today. All right, I'm gonna pray and close this out, and we'll see you guys next weekend. God, we love you and we thank you. I always thank you for your word. Thank you for men like Solomon who's come and give us these beautiful statements, proverbs, wisdom. And may we take those and work them into our lives this week as we allow you to define good and evil for us. God, may we be people who consistently choose your view of reality. I just pray that you be with our people, that you bring us back safe this next week. Father, that you would just bring the people to this Easter egg hunt that we could connect with, that we could meet, and just give good news and hope that's in the gospel. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a good week, guys.